If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. SubhashTechnosis.com is an Indian-based search engine optimization company. You could find them online at SubhashTechnosis.com or on Facebook at Subhash Technosis LLC. If you need a website designed, if you need search engine optimization, internet reputation repair, if you need data entry, customer service. They can even handle your customer service for you. Press releases, content writing, all kinds of stuff at SubhashTechnosis.com. Make sure if you contact Subhash, I've known this guy for 10 years. If you contact Subhash with a project, they're very open to helping you out and outsourcing your projects for you. Make sure you mention Ed Opperman and the Opperman Report. That's how you get a good deal. Okay. I'm really excited about tonight. Everybody knows me. I'm kind of we got Jeff Diamant. Okay, and he's written the book Heist, the oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. And there's a movie that just came out. In fact, you can still find it. It's on there on Hulu and all those Putlocker, those kind of sites, called Mastermind with that guy Zach Galifianakis, about these crew of guys back in the 90s, 97, who robbed an armored car company, no guns or anything. They just took the money. And it's a really fun story, and everybody loves a bank heist. Everybody likes a good bank heist movie. Jeff Diamant, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Ed. It's really nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah, I love these kind of stories. Tell us about yourself. Who is Jeff Diamant?
Sure. I was a newspaper reporter for 15 years. I started a paper in Florida called the Palm Beach Post, worked a little bit for the Associated Press in Kansas City. Then I worked as a crime reporter at the Charlotte Observer. This is all before I was like 24. Newspaper reporters move around a lot, especially when they're younger. And I covered crime for about 3 years at the Charlotte Observer, including this case. Then I went to work at the Newark Star Ledger in New Jersey, where I worked for about 10 years, very much of it covering religion, and I started covering Islam in America. And then after that, when the newspaper industry started to implode, as perhaps you've heard about, yeah. I got a PhD. I enrolled in a doctorate program, got a fellowship to do research on Muslim history in America, Muslim American history. Just got a PhD, and I started working about 4 months ago at the Pew Research Center in Washington as a writer.
Oh my goodness, very impressive! And you sound like such a young guy. I would have guessed you're like in your 30s or something. I guess not, right? And you're in D.C. now. You live in D.C.
It's been an interesting time.
Yeah. But you live in D.C. now, right?
I just moved here, yeah.
Okay, very
After having lived in Brooklyn and Charlotte and New Jersey. So, yeah, I've been around.
Yeah, I grew up in Staten Island and came out here out west.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding you at all.
I grew up in Staten Island.
What part?
New Springville?
Yeah, New Springville. Line yeah, me too. Well, get out of here. Okay. How old are you?
What street did you? What street?
Okay.
I'm 44.
Okay, I'm 54. And I grew up first on Lamoka Avenue.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then when I grew up, you're not going to believe this, I moved back to New Springville into those Elmwood Park Drive, right behind the mall. And I had a business.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I had a business in the mall.
What's that place called? The Village? Not the Village Greens. I forget what it's called. They have a new school there now.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I grew up at the mall. Friday nights.
Okay.
Food court, whatever they called it.
I had front page beepers in the Staten Island Mall. I used to sell the beepers and the cell phones out of the mall.
That's very funny.
I know.
Where did you go to high school? McKee
High School.
McKee Tech. Yeah. I went to Wagner.
Okay, yeah, I went to McKee when it was in St. George. Not when it merged with Newdorp, so it was a while back. Oh, boy. Staten Island. Oh, yeah.
Small world, Ed. Small world. I still take my kid on the Staten Island Ferry. He loves it.
Yeah, my kid goes back to visit with her mom to New York, but I haven't taken her back there yet myself. But I'm dying to. I'm sure around Staten Island and stuff. You know who grew up in our neighborhood was Reverend Bob Levy from the Howard Stern Show. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah, he knows all the same stories I know because he's my age. Yeah. Anyway.
A lot of interesting people grew up in Staten Island.
Right, and there was a big famous bank robber on Staten Island too that robbed the bank in the mall, and then he went down to Miami and he hooked up with Madonna and he opened up a nightclub and stuff like that. Real famous case. In fact, he killed a couple of guys on Staten Island. Okay, but let's get back to this. Loomis, $17 million. Maybe some of this money still we can find. The heist, the oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. So now you were down there in North Carolina, Charlotte Observer, when all this was going on. So tell us how you heard about it first.
So I was one of the Charlotte Observer's crime reporters. It was 1997. I guess I was about 24 years old. And back then, before the newspaper industry was completely transformed by the internet and everything else, covering crime was one of the jobs they gave to young reporters. It was an excellent way to learn about journalism, frankly, to learn about life. And you hung out with cops, you hung out with prosecutors, lawyers, FBI agents, and you got to interview bad guys. You got to interview people who, and not only bad guys, you got to interview people who were, maybe living on the tough side of the tracks, and just, you really got to cover a lot of things. And one day, it came over the scanner that there had been this large heist. And the next day we found out that it was $17 million, which was said to be the second largest cash heist in U.S. history. Now, for the first 4 or 5 months about this, the newspapers didn't really know that much about this because the money was missing. They had no idea who did it, and usually at this stage in investigations, newspapers cover it really just without really knowing many of the facts. So one day, it was March 1st, 1998. 5 months after this happened, in October of 1997, we get a call that there's going to be a big press conference at the FBI headquarters in Charlotte, which was the base for the North Carolina, which remains the base for the Carolinas for the FBI, and we just found out about all these crazy, wacky, fascinating details about the case. There are basically three main people who were involved in this, and one of them was a guy named David Ghantt. The other one was a guy named Steve Chambers, and there was a woman named Kelly Campbell. David Ghantt had worked for Loomis Fargo as a vault supervisor, and he basically drove trucks of money around and helped stock ATMs, picked up money at banks. And one day he decided that, with the encouragement of Kelly Campbell and Steve Chambers in various ways, that the three of them together were going to steal money from the vault. He was actually going to steal it all himself because he worked there, but he was going to give it to them to hold while he fled to Mexico. And then down the road, he thought they were going to split it three ways, and he would get, $5 million or so and get to live a happy life down in Mexico with, changing his name and just not really having to worry about his life anymore. Didn't quite work out that way for David Ghantt. For one thing, he thought that Kelly Campbell was going to come down and live with him. He was actually in love with her, despite the fact that they were married to different people, which made things just a little bit complex. David was not very happy in his marriage, though, and he wanted to, I'd say, shake things up a little bit, but he just wanted to really explode the whole thing. But unbeknownst to him, Kelly Campbell really didn't love him at all, and she was just playing him the entire way. And after the money was stolen, David basically took $17 million, put it in a van, drove the van somewhere near Charlotte, had Kelly drive him to the airport, and he left all the money with this guy, Steve Chambers. Now, one of the things that made this such a great story, and which I try very hard to capture in the book, is that so many things did not go according to plan. And frankly, they didn't plan very well at all. This is really, one for the annals of dumb crook history. Despite knowing that David was going to go to Mexico, that night they didn't even buy him a plane ticket. So when Kelly Campbell drives him to, Kelly Campbell drives him to the airport like 90 minutes after he's stolen this money, $17 million, and they see that the airport's kind of quiet. And David's like, that's kind of strange. Why are there no planes taking off and landing? It was in Columbia, South Carolina, because he figured if he went to the airport in Charlotte, he figured maybe they'd know it was him and they'd be on the lookout for him. But when he gets to the airport in Columbia, he sees it's quiet, and it turns out it was closed for the night. And he was just absolutely stunned that they would not have gotten him this, a ticket at the very least. So they put him on a bus to Atlanta, where he got a plane to New Orleans and finally wound up going to Cancun. Meanwhile, back in the Charlotte area, Steve Chambers and a few other people he had brought in as accomplices start counting the money. And they didn't realize how much they had stolen, frankly. But they had stolen so much that they actually couldn't actually fit all of it into the budget rental van that they had gotten to unload the money from the Loomis Fargo van. So they actually had to leave $3 million behind.
Get out of here. Now, by the way, the cash weighed a ton. It was a ton of cash.
It was 2,700 pounds. It was literally more than a ton of cash. You're absolutely right. And so what Steve Chambers decided was, obviously, he said, we can't go driving around a Loomis Fargo van. People will be looking for that. You can't park that in front of your home. So they got this they got a budget van. And Steve also he was very careful about this. One of the few things he was careful about, he didn't want to have all the money, strewn around the back of the van. So he actually got these 55-gallon drums, the blue ones you see, and they put as much money as would fit into these drums, and they had to leave. They did have the foresight to leave the small bills behind.
Oh no!
So they're driving this through the town on the state roads and the highways of North Carolina. On a Saturday evening, October 4th, 1997, and they get up there and they start counting it, and they realize they have about $14.4 million. And meanwhile, David had only taken about $25,000 with him down to Mexico, figuring that he would have no trouble getting the lion's share of the money afterwards. Well, what happened then is David, when he starts living, he never had $25,000, and certainly not in one fell swoop like that. So it felt like a lot of money to him. He was making $8.15 an hour. He didn't really, the reason he did this is actually kind of interesting. I had the opportunity to talk with him in prison a couple times, and he told me what motivated him to do this. And sure, he was certainly upset with his life and his marriage, but he kind of felt he was going nowhere, and he felt like he didn't really have an opportunity to change things. He hadn't gone to college. He'd been overseas in the Persian Gulf War, repairing helicopters, and he wasn't really able to change his life to really capitalize on that in any meaningful way. So one day he was telling me, he was looking at his credit card bill, and he realized that if he made the minimum payments, it would take him like 30 years to pay it off. And paying them, so that's when he decided, when Kelly asked him if he would do it, he decided he would. So
let me ask
he never had any money like this.
Let me ask you a technical question. Now, this guy's making $8 an hour, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
How is it he was able to? And they got, and you hear this all the time with these, especially back in those days, back in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. This kind of thing was happening quite a bit, where the guards would somehow have access late at night to all the money, and they're wheeling it around, and they got the trucks. If he's making $8 an hour, how did he have access to the money all by himself in order to get it out unseen?
That's an excellent question.
Well, I'm plotting the heist, man. I'm plotting one. Okay.
So basically, these companies have a rule, And the movie actually caught some element of this pretty well. You have to the money. If you can't be around the money yourself, you have to be around it. There have to be two people around the money at all times. But what David did was he scheduled the heist for an evening when he knew the second person with him was scheduled to be a trainee who didn't, a new employee who didn't really know the operation all that well. So at the end of the shift, David left the vault jar. He left the vault door ajar, because he knows the trainee wouldn't be looking for it. Walks outside to the parking lot, gets in his pickup truck, pulls out a cigarette, waves goodbye as the new employee drives away. And then after a couple minutes after that, he goes back into the vault, loads a van up to the vault, opens the door again, which he had never closed, and steps inside and starts loading money onto carts, shrink-wrapped cash, and he proceeds to unload, over the course of the next 75 to 80 minutes, proceeds to unload the contents of the vault onto the truck. And this is very interesting because it was very, very tiring work. And David was about 6'1", maybe 170 pounds, I think. He was a pretty thin guy. And this would have been tough work for anybody. And the video cameras that recorded him, the amount that you've taken, then the act of actually doing it in the first place. You violate every single trust that your employer could have with you. One stack of cash for, whatever it was, whatever many tens of thousands of dollars it was, the penalty would not have been that much better or less than had he did what he did. The real benefit to him was that he didn't actually use a gun or anything. So it was technically a theft as opposed to a robbery because there was no violence involved. So anyway, he unloads the entire amount of cash that's in the vault. And then he goes inside the van and he goes to the back entrance of the Loomis Fargo warehouse and he presses the button that's supposed to open this metal gate. To his dismay, the gate does not open. It's a mechanical problem. And to get out the front gate, he actually has to move two vans that are blocking his way. This is all. Once again, he has realized that even if something goes wrong, even the fact that even if he would get caught before actually taking any of the money, his entire life would change. He'd go to prison. He would be in very, very big trouble. His life as he knew it was over. Yeah. So he manages to move the vans. He manages to open the gate. And then he can't open the chain link fence outside the warehouse. Lucky for him, Steve Chambers had a couple people who were working as accomplices. One of them helped open the gate, and he wound up getting away with over $17 million, which should have been the hardest part of the whole thing. But they actually pulled it off.
Well, let me ask you this, because now you said that he waited until there was a trainee on there with him, right?
Yeah.
So how long were they planning this before the night of the big event?
They started planning this probably, I believe, about 3 or 4 months before it happened. Wow. What happened was, and as it was described to me, it was all planned over at a barbecue over a game when they were playing Uno. And David was not involved in this. It was Steve Chambers and Kelly Campbell. Steve Chambers, now they all lived in a similar area, basically around what's called Gaston County, North Carolina, which is kind of like an old mill town area just west of Charlotte. And Steve Chambers had worked a number of mill-type jobs, and he was somewhat of a small-time crook in the area, doing things like writing bad checks and things like that. And he actually proposed the idea to Kelly. He proposed the idea to Kelly Campbell one day. Kelly Campbell had actually worked at Loomis Fargo, which is where she got to know David. But she only maybe worked there for a year or so, and after that she went to go work at a different security job. And Kelly and Steve says to Kelly, because Steve was always looking for the next big thing or the next crime to pull off, I guess. He says to Kelly, you used to work at Loomis Fargo. Is it possible to steal from the place? And Kelly apparently at first kind of tries to dissuade him and says, no, you're being ridiculous, Steve. And he comes up with these different ideas. But soon enough, Steve could be pretty persistent, and he convinced Kelly. He said, you know anybody who still works there? And Kelly said something along the lines of, yeah, this guy David Ghantt. Maybe he, and Kelly knew that David liked her, which is another part of this. David had a crush on her that was basically unrequited. And so Kelly starts to approach David with the idea. That's actually one thing the movie got pretty well. The movie made up a lot of stuff later on, which, of course, is the screenwriter's prerogative. Yeah. I happen to think the real story was a better story. But anyway, so Kelly basically persuades David to do this, partially with the idea that they'll live together in Mexico and, on the beach and just, be lovers and whatnot. And David, like I said before, is kind of going back and forth. He doesn't like his marriage. He hates his job. He'd just been disciplined by his Loomis Fargo employee for leaving money unguarded for a short period. And after he looked at his credit card bill that day, he decides he's going to do it. This all plays out over the course of maybe 2 or 3 months, 3 or 4 months. And so David knew at a certain point that the best way to do this would be to wait until he was working with his trainee. David actually was a big reader. These people all got lampooned in the media after this happened for being stupid. But David was actually he came across as a very interesting character. He certainly made some terrible decisions, but he actually had read a lot about the FBI, and he knew how he had a sense of how these places worked, and he had this impression that if he stole the money and laid low for a long time, that it would go from being worked on by like 20 agents to 10 agents to 5 agents to maybe like 2 or 3 years, maybe one guy, and it'd just be an old case file. And he hoped he thought he might be able to wait that out. Unbeknownst to him, the people in North Carolina were spending the money like he was going out of style. Yeah.
And it's a good question. Now, when they got the van full of money, where did they put it next? They put it in those drums, but then they put it in a garage, a storage locker. What did they do with it?
That's a very good question. So the first thing, Steve Chambers had a lot. Steve Chambers was basically in control of the money after the theft. And the first thing he does is he puts it in storage facilities, with lockers and things like that. And he has cousins and friends and other relatives basically, sign for them for authority. He tells them he won the money gambling. He pays them about, tens of thousands of dollars to hide this money for him, apparently without telling him where it came from. And that was his initial plan. About a month later, however, one of his like a cousin's friend or someone who wasn't related to Steve, maybe only through, they were related to Steve, they were related to the relative through a different marriage, actually stole the money from the storage locker, about $1.5 million of it, or $2 million of it. And when Steve saw that this had happened, he decided he was going to move the money to safe deposit box. And so he wound up doing that, and that's where it was when they wound up getting arrested in March.
Well, he must have had like 100 safe deposit boxes in, right?
I would say he had about maybe 10 or 20 of them. But he had enough money out that he also started putting it in banks. And one of the best details, and there were many great details. One of the most entertaining was Steve's wife walks into I think it was a Nations Bank back then, right outside of Charlotte in the town of Mount Holly, and it's with a briefcase full of cash. She walks up to the teller and says, and this is almost a quote, "How much money can I deposit without you having to file a report?"
Right.
So the teller looks at her and says, $10,000, which is the correct answer. So Michelle Chambers takes out $9,500 from the briefcase and puts it onto the counter, and the teller looks at her like she's crazy, and Michelle is understandably nervous, and she says, "Oh, don't worry, it's not drug money." Well, even though, yeah, exactly. So even though it was underneath the threshold, the teller still wrote what's called a suspicious activity report. Now, those things, especially back then, took about 2 or 3 months to get to the right channels, but they did a number of things like that. Steve and Michelle, this is probably the craziest thing they did, and probably if there was one thing that got them caught, it would have been this. They moved from their mobile home, maybe, in Lincoln County, maybe about an hour from Charlotte, into basically a mansion type, a mini mansion about, actually closer to the scene of the crime. At the time, it cost $635,000, in a real estate market that wasn't that crazy. So just a huge, beautiful house. And then they weren't really working. They weren't working, so people started to notice. And one way what happened was, some confidential informants started calling the FBI, saying, because this heist was news all over the Charlotte area, all over the Carolinas. And so, less than a month later, you have these guys, you have this family who didn't really have any ostensibly any type of job. they're spending the money left and right. They bought a BMW Z3, a $43,000 diamond ring. I forget how many carats it was, and they're just living large, telling people that they'd wanted gambling, and Steve had told people that he was a former Dallas cowboy. That was before Google was invented, so people couldn't really check that one out. And so people started calling the FBI. And one of the reasons that wound up helping the FBI was because the day after the crime, the FBI obviously started doing interviews with people at Loomis Fargo and various employees, and they were trying to find out. They knew about David Ghantt. One of the mistakes David Ghantt had made, which I forgot to mention this before. So after David took all the money, he took 2 video cameras that he knew were recording it. He took them because he thought they wouldn't have the tapes. He took 2 videotapes, but he didn't realize that there were actually 3 video cameras recording. So the FBI had, the very next morning, were able to watch David Ghantt steal all this money on video. So they knew that he had actually done this. What they didn't know is whether he had any accomplices, whether maybe someone was holding a gun at him or something while he was doing it. They really had no idea of that. So what they did was they started trying to talk to people at Loomis Fargo to try to find out, who is this guy? Does he know anybody here? Might he have had an accomplice who worked here? And people started saying, he was really friends or dating. They thought he was dating this woman, Kelly Campbell. So the FBI, a few days later, goes to Kelly Campbell's mobile home, 1 county west, and starts to interview her, and she's acting very suspiciously, as makes sense. And so they started trying to follow her a little bit and, start to check her phone records, and they saw that she and Steve Chambers had talked a lot, and at this point Steve Chambers had been reported by confidential informants, and that's one of the ways they wound up getting and learning about all of this stuff. Yeah.
So they pretty much had him the first week. She pretty much cracked. They could tell she was guilty. They checked their phone records. They got Steve Chambers. So pretty much they had this thing cracked. Yeah.
They did. Although at that early point they were getting confidential informants telling them about dozens and dozens of people. So
right.
They didn't know that Kelly and Steve were doing it. And the tips about Steve came about a month later because he had been. Because it took a while for him to actually, close on the house.
Let me ask you about that house. Now, how do you did he take a mortgage on the house, or he paid for the whole thing cash, or cash down payment? Did he work it into checks?
This is actually another funny part of the story. Yeah. Steve paid for the house in cash. Now, usually when people talk about paying for a house in cash, it means they write a check for the entire amount, right? But Steve actually brought a bag or 2 with $400,000 to his lawyer's office, intending to pay for the house in cash, right? Again, telling his lawyer that it was gambling money. His lawyer said, "Look, you can't pay for this house in actual cash. You have to get checks for it, right?" So Steve was able to get, again through nefarious means, he was able to get checks. But it was a very, very, very nice house. It had a piano. It had a really nice staircase. It was the type of house that makes all of Steve's old friends absolutely, gape, gasp, and just be really, really impressed.
I'm curious about this lawyer. Now, was this the same lawyer that later on represented him in the criminal case?
So this lawyer, there was the one person in the case, in the original 2 rounds of arrests, who actually had to go to trial. Everybody else, the evidence was so strong against them that they just really had no choice but to plead guilty. The lawyer, however, was a guy named Jeff Guller, and he basically represented Steve Chambers in various cases. He got to know him because before the heist, he represented Steve in these misdemeanors, I think, where Steve had, or maybe they were low-level felonies, where Steve had written about $30,000 in bad checks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he had a working relationship with Steve Chambers, and after the heist, when Steve Chambers, another way he tried to hide the money was like, trying to buy clubs and various places he could put the money. And Jeff Guller was his lawyer, and also represented him at the closing for his house, and knew that he was carrying around all these huge amounts of cash. What really brought him down was at one point, Steve paid Jeff Guller about $10,000 simply for holding the cash in Jeff Guller's legal a legal office. Guller apparently tried to say, no, I don't need this, but he wound up taking the money after Steve persuaded him. And there were various other things. And Guller refused to plead guilty. He knew that if he did that, he would have to give up his law license, right? Because you can't be a lawyer if you have a felony on your record, even if you plead guilty to it. And because of that, his sentence was actually longer than that of David Ghantt. Again, because when you plead guilty in the federal system, as I'm sure you and many of your listeners know, when you plead guilty in the federal system, it works to your advantage come sentencing. And if you don't plead guilty and you go to trial and get convicted that way, you really don't get any advantages.
What was the lawyer charged with?
It was a money laundering case, I believe.
Money laundering.
Yeah, it was. And it was somewhat of a. It was somewhat, I believe, it was a liberal, a very kind of a loose definition of technically money laundering. But what he had done, and he was still kind of accused. The case against him was pretty strong. That he knew, or should have known, that the money came from the Loomis Fargo heist, or was somehow illegally obtained by Steve. I mean, Guller's own case was that he had just not known that it was money from the heist. That he took he had a lot of clients. They never paid him. Here's Steve Chambers, actually paying him, claiming it was gambling money. So why shouldn't he take the money? But the jury thought that he clearly knew about the heist, and there were lots of reasons why the prosecutor's case is pretty convincing. Oh
yeah, come on. Listen.
Yeah.
Come on. I give him credit for trying. Okay, but come on. A guy walks in with $400,000 cash. He didn't find it on a truck.
In the weeks after the Loomis Fargo heist, in fact, one of the most damning evidence against him was Jeff Guller's secretary, one of his or legal assistants, actually told him this is probably from the heist. And she actually called America's Most Wanted and tried to get in touch with people. And, Steve just didn't believe it. He said he had no proof. Jeff Guller didn't believe it. He said, there's no proof of this. So there were definitely alarm bells that went off to other people in his office.
Okay, I forgot to tell you when we were prepping for the show that we have a commercial break at the half hour right now. It's a 5-minute long commercial break, so you got plenty of time to go get a drink of water. And but you won't be able to hear the commercial, and we won't be able to talk during the break either. So when I come back, if you don't make it back in time, I'll just fill up the time till we get back. We are here with Jeff Diamant. This guy has a great storytelling quality too about you. The book is Heist: The Oddball Crew Behind the $17 Million Loomis Fargo Theft. Jeff Diamant. This is an incredible story. We'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com and our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we can trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the Opperman Report .com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations. Live Friday night, and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air. You get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by a the range covers 5 million people in population where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here to Jeff Diamant. Today we're discussing his book, Heist. Let me pull this up real quick. Heist. The oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. Jeff Diamant, Staten Island boy, made good. Was down there. Unlike this other Staten Island boy, I hate to admit. but okay, great. Now we're our hero, Dave Ghantt, is down in Mexico, right? And everything's falling apart. The other guy, Chambers, is buying a $600,000 house. And what's going on with Ghantt? Now, he only got $25,000. Is he asking for more money?
Oh, yes. David Ghantt wants to get his share of the $17 million, which, he figures is $5.5, $6 million. He figures, as the person who actually stole the money, he deserves at least his fair share of it. Yeah. So what he does is he has a regularly scheduled payphone call with Kelly Campbell on Tuesdays and Thursdays at this phone outside a convenience store, and he starts telling her he wants more money. Now, unbeknownst to David Ghantt, Steve Chambers has actually hired a hitman to kill him. Also unbeknownst to David Ghantt is that the name of the hitman is Michael McKinney, which is the name of the fake ID, whose fake ID Steve had given to David to use in Mexico, right? So McKinney's plan is not to kill David right away, but to gain his trust by dropping off amounts of money to him over time.
Okay.
So about a month after this happens, about a month after the crime, Steve sends McKinney down to Cancun, which is where David was, with about, $10,000. And when McKinney gives him the money, David is very upset because he wanted $100,000 or more than that. And he complains about it, and McKinney says, sorry, that's all I got. So this happens about maybe 3 or 4 times, and McKinney realizes he's going to have a hard time killing David. And actually, the way this plays out is really fascinating because McKinney didn't know. McKinney did not know at the very beginning, basically who David Ghantt was. He just figured it was, Steve was just paying him to, and Steve hadn't told him what his name was. He just told him it was, something different. And so McKinney winds up finding later what David had done, and then he's like, whoa, well, the FBI is definitely onto this. I can't get involved in a murder here. But he still wants Steve's money. Steve was going to pay him $250,000 to kill David Ghantt. So what he does is McKinney actually subcontracts the murder out to some local hoodlum in Cancun, who winds up taking a liking to David and telling him about the plot. And actually, the way they got into this, again, the details of this are just so great. This is what David told me, that David met this guy Robert at a bar one day before David knew that he was, a problem. And David was wearing, he was a Pittsburgh Steelers football fan. So one of the big Steelers at the time, I think their fullback or running back was named Jerome Bettis. And David was wearing a Jerome Bettis jersey. So when they show up at this bar in the jersey, it turns out that Robert was also a Steelers fan. And he's like, whoa, where'd you get that jersey? This is what David told me. And after that, they bonded over their love of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this sounds like fiction, I know, but this is what David told me, and it seemed pretty true. And Robert actually wound up spilling the beans on McKinney's plan. So after that, of course, David wanted nothing to do with McKinney, and so they had to figure out something else to do.
Well, let me ask you this: wait, McKinney was he the kind of guy that had ever killed somebody before, or had a crime of this level?
He had never had a crime on this level before that. He was a Marine who got kicked out of the Marines for failing the drug test. He had never done anything like this before, but he knew how to handle a weapon.
Gotcha.
And so, incidentally, he's played in the movie by Jason Sudeikis, who makes him into an absolute maniac, which in person he probably, in real life, he wasn't truly a maniac. He claimed that he was never going to actually, kill him. But what happened was in late February, he actually was going to go down there, and the FBI started recording a conversation between McKinney and Steve Chambers, and they heard they were talking about machine guns and things like that. And the FBI hadn't really been sure what to do because they knew these people were involved in the theft. They'd been trying to find David Ghantt. They figured they didn't have to arrest him, or they didn't have to arrest the people in North Carolina, but they didn't know where the money was. They didn't know where Ghantt was. They actually had come to learn that the money was from Loomis Fargo, but not until they found out that these guys were going to kill Ghantt did they actually swoop in and arrest them, including McKinney.
Okay. They arrested McKinney too for attempted murder, for plotting for the murder.
Yeah, along with Steve and actually Kelly, because Kelly knew about the murder plot and was feeding Ghantt information about. Was feeding Steve information about Gantt's whereabouts in Mexico, so McKinney would be able to know where he was.
That's amazing. Because bank robbery is one thing. It's like a victimless crime. You load up a truck. No guns or nothing. But then later on, that these guys would actually want to kill one of their accomplices just because they didn't want to pay him, or they were afraid he was going to rat them out. Or it was just they didn't want to pay him. Greed.
Yeah, they probably thought he was going to rat them out. It was, and greed was certainly a part of it too. They could have given him the money, of course, and they probably would have still had more money than they'd ever had before by a long shot.
Yeah, give him $2 million. They're going to give $250,000 to this other guy for killing him. Now, what about David Gantt's wife? What was she saying?
David Gantt's wife was the saddest story of this entire thing. She was a very nice woman named Tammy. She didn't see any of this coming at all. As far as she was concerned, their marriage was excellent. She had a really nice life. She loved him. They lived in, mobile home in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, mountains behind them, and they would, spend time together, and she, when this happened, the FBI at first obviously wanted to know whether Gantt's relative knew about this, of course, and so they started interviewing them, and it became clear the first day that she was absolutely stunned by this and had no idea at all. They gave her a lie detector test, and she after a while she wound up learning. They didn't really doubt her at all, and she was absolutely stunned by this. And it was made worse by the fact that, it became clear that David was in love with this woman Kelly, which happened after the arrest. So I remember being there in the courtroom when they looked at each other after he'd been away for 5 months. One part of it, at first she was glad that he wasn't dead, of course, because she thought that he might be dead until the arrest. But then obviously when she learned he was alive, she was upset for a completely different reason. They stayed together. She was with him for maybe a few months or so after this, and then they wound up getting separated and divorced after that.
Now, what about David Gantz?
Processed everything.
Yeah, David Gantz and Kelly Campbell. Did they ever actually have sex or romance or anything like that, or was it all just some kind of crush?
At one point during the planning, they were in a pickup truck behind a shooting range in Gaston County, North Carolina, not too far from where I lived actually at the time. And they kissed in a pickup truck, but it didn't really go any further than that. In fact, after David got arrested, because the FBI had been listening to the conversations between the two of them, about a week before they arrested him, and they would hear David say, he would end calls with "I love you." And Kelly would always say, "Okay, goodbye, I'll talk to you next Tuesday," right? And so the FBI was wondering about this. And so when Dave was on the plane, the agent who arrested him, a guy named Mark Rossi, says to him, "So David, I got to ask, tell me about what happened, what's going on with you and Kelly Campbell?" And David goes basically along the lines of, I never had sex with her. We kissed just once. And he goes, "Pretty expensive kiss."
Wow. How did they arrest Gantz? How'd they get home? How'd they find him in Mexico?
So what happened was, in the final weeks of all the wiretaps, so another big thing they did besides using phones was that they started using physical surveillance. It's amazing. A lot of these things, despite all the computers and technology, and there's an agent named John Wider who did a lot of good work with bank records and things like that. Just a lot of good old-fashioned, shoe leather. They interviewed the people at Loomis Fargo and wound up finding Kelly Campbell that way. They basically did a lot of physical surveillance of Kelly, and they found that she was driving a minivan that was, co-signed for by an alias of Steve Chambers. And in addition to that, they saw that she was taking phone calls outside this convenience store. So in late February, about a couple of weeks before the arrest, they started a wiretap. They started a wiretap, on these phone calls, and they eventually got David's location in Cozumel, or Playa del Carmen, which is right outside of Cancun. And they basically sent down some officers. Interpol officers were kind of in charge of the operation, but they were allowed to send an FBI agent as well, this guy Mark Rossi. And they were kind of tailing them, and at one point they actually lost him for a little bit. The Interpol folks had a hard time tracking him somehow. And then they wound up, the story was he was walking along the street with a laundry bag one day, and going out to do his laundry, and the officers go up to him. And at this point, David's scared for his life, okay? David knows people are trying to kill him, and he's paranoid. He's walking everywhere, looking in every direction. He claims that at one point he walked out of a barber shop with his hair half cut when he saw a police officer walk in. And so anyway, he's walking through the streets, and a bunch of officers walk up to him, and they say, "Excuse me, are you David Ghantt?" And he says, "No, I'm Michael McKinney," using the name from his fake ID. And they say, that's not true, is it, Mr. Ghantt? At this point, David Ghantt isn't really sure who it is. So he sees this FBI agent who has an American look about him. He's an American guy, and he says, if Ghantt says to him, "Please tell me you're an FBI agent," because he was worried that the guy was a killer or something.
Yeah.
And the agent goes, "Yes, I am." And David goes, Boy, am I glad to see you.
Oh, man. Hey, in total, how
Great
much
stuff.
did I thought this is incredible. And I remember, by the way, too, they had a story about this, like a documentary type. I think it was like on...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember this story because...
There've been a bunch of documentaries on this. People can't really get enough of this story. And, it's been on various documentaries. And obviously, last year there was a movie about it. And I'd originally written the book in 2002, and I thought it was okay. But when the movie came out again, the screenwriter didn't use my book, but I thought it would be a great opportunity to revisit the whole thing, the writing process. And I think I got to write. I wrote a better book this time, but these details, they're all in the book, and there's a lot more, too.
Yeah, that's Heist, the Oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. It's on Amazon, and also, too, I'll have a link in the Opperman Report bookstore. David Ghantt, how much money did he actually receive in all of this? The first $25,000 and a bunch of 10 grands after that. How much total did he make?
I believe he made less than $100,000. He got less than $100,000, I think, as I recall. Yeah, definitely less than $100,000, and he was not enjoying it. He claims that this was the best time of his life, and the most thrilling time of his life in retrospect, both to me and in subsequent interviews. But there were certainly thrills. But he was also really nervous for a lot of the time that he was going to get his share, that Kelly Campbell was going to come live with him, and obviously after a couple months that people were going to kill him.
Yeah. How long was he free from the time of the crime till the time he went to jail?
5 months. All of them were on the loose for 5 months.
Oh my God.
And yeah.
Just imagine, man, if you and me did this job. Man, a couple of Staten Island boys. Yeah, right, man. We'd be sitting fat, man. We'd be down in a.
We get written up. We get written up in the advance.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh my God. Now, how much time? They're all out now, right?
They've been out for a long time because they didn't use weapons. Most of them got sentences that were, 5 or 6 years or less. Steve Chambers and Mike McKinney both got longer sentences because they were involved in this murder plot, to try to kill Ghantt. Jeff Guller got a longer sentence. I think he got 7 or 8 years. Ghantt got about just under 6 years. Jeff Guller got about 7 or 8. Steve Chambers and Mike McKinney got about 11 and a half. They probably served about 8 or 9 of them because of the sentencing rules. They've all been out for quite a while now. Most of them have been out for more than a decade.
Now, how much of the money's been recovered out of the 14?
Almost all. I would say almost all the money's been recovered. So I mentioned before that there were some people who had stolen the money from the storage facility. They stole just under $2 million, probably $1.5 to $2 million. Most of that was recovered after their trial. About a year later, they actually fled to Colorado and were living much more intelligently than the folks in North Carolina had been. My impression is that almost all the money was either recovered or I don't have the impression that people are still spending it. They spent it on things that were that couldn't be recovered. But my impression was at one point there was like a missing $2 million, and then after a trial they recovered about $1 million of that. And there's probably some of it still around, but not that much. Yeah,
because a lot of it, you spend it on booze and women.
Yeah.
Gambling, and then the rest you piss away, right? Now, what about...
that was another fun detail. When Mike McKinney went down to Cancun with David Gantt's 10 grand,
yeah,
he would spend portions of it on himself, to boozing and on women and things like that. None of which made David very happy.
And then, so he was even getting ripped off by him. Now, what are all these people doing today?
The one who talks the most to the press and everything, I haven't written about this in a long time, of course.
Yeah.
David Ghantt is living in Florida. I believe for a while he was doing landscaping jobs, and he got married. He's living kind of a new life. He seems to be, this was out of character for him. This is very out of character for him at the time. People who knew him were stunned, absolutely stunned that he would do this. If you read crime stories, and I used to write them, that's what happens when you talk to people after no, I never would have thought he would do that. But this did seem out of character, and he said in an interview, his wife sometimes joked with him about it because it was just such a stupid thing to do in so many different ways. The others are much more reluctant to talk to the press or being public about it. And David was actually a consultant to the movie. And there's a brief scene that he's actually in the movie. I guess as an extra. I haven't seen this written about it. You have to be a diehard about the whole thing to really care about it. But he didn't really shy away from the publicity. He became friendly with Zach Galifianakis, who portrayed him in the movie, which is kind of funny to me. But most of the others really want nothing to do with the publicity.
Well, in that movie, The Falcon and the Snowman, the snowman went to work for Sean Penn after they did the movie. Now,
wow.
Yeah, I know. I guess these things happen, right? But now, you were saying that it couldn't happen today because technology's changed. So how are we going to get around it?
Well, I would just think it would be more difficult in all sorts of ways to get away with this type of thing right now. I mean, obviously you wouldn't. They were using phones. It would be much harder to use phones, I think. Or I guess it would be a different type of. They have those so-called burner phones now, right? That were made famous in The Wire. So it would be a very different type of investigation. I think it would be a different way of trying to lay low. It would be I think it would just be. I envision it would be more difficult to get away with this than it would have been 20 years ago. And it was very hard to get away with this 20 years ago. Obviously, they obviously couldn't do it.
Yeah, 5 months. That's really not much. Not much of a successful job, for these guys. Mm-hmm. That's a shame. So now, is there anything I've forgotten to ask you about this that you think is important you want to tell us?
I think we've covered a lot of it. One of the interesting elements of it that I didn't think about when it happened was the working class element of this. Almost everybody involved in this hadn't gone to college and were really struggling financially just to make good. And this is around the time when people started talking about how manufacturing obviously had already taken a downturn in this country, basically from the 70s, I guess. But it was getting harder and harder to live a decent life, or to live a financially secure life, I should say. It was getting hard to live a financially secure life without a college education. And I thought that these people they kind of demonstrated that. David talked to me a good idea about David talked to me from prison a good amount about the American dream and how his parents had lived a middle class life. They sent him to Catholic school. They went to Disney World every now and then. They shopped at J.C. Penney's and Macy's, I think. All of these middle class type things. And he was telling me, I have to shop at Walmart, and I know there's nothing wrong with that, but I'd like to be able to shop at other places too. He would tell me about how he had to go, he had to check out, he wanted to buy a pair of cowboy boots, and he had to go 7 different places before he found one that he liked. He only got to eat a couple of meals a week that he liked. The rest of the time was all hamburger helper. And I thought it was interesting in that light. I mean, I saw it as sympathetic. A lot of people were sympathetic to David Ghantt in this. I mean, aside from the stupid decision to do it in the first place, and he was stealing money that belonged to banks and whatnot, but he was kind of a dupe in all this in one sense. And the story before it, again, taking out what he did, the terrible thing he did to his wife, it's kind of a sad tale. Someone who's not happy. He in his eyes, the world was passing him by. He would tell me he had all these friends who never struck him as particularly smart, who he thought he was smarter than he was, and they were doing better than he was. And he, on the other hand, was seemed unable to do what, even live like his parents do. And the American dream is you're supposed to do better than your parents, all right? And I thought this was kind of like a harbinger of things to come in a certain way, this type of story that he's telling, where, the credit card bills. And I mean, it's one thing to be in your 20s or your early 30s and you work jobs and you're not making much money and you can't afford things. But the dream is supposed to be that if you keep on working hard and eventually you will be able to afford those things. But David had a pretty good sense that he was never going to be able to afford them, and this was his crazy way out of it. And I thought over the years, I've come to think about that as we hear more and more stories about, people working 2 or 3 jobs for less money and things like that. This obviously is a very warped thing to do in that situation, but I've come to think of it in some degree of, in some shade of that light.
I hear you. I hear you, because it really is tragic what's gone on in the past 20, 30 years, the change of the standard of living in this country for the average working man. But now, Ghantt, though, did he have any kids? No kids, right?
He didn't have any kids at the time. I believe he has a daughter now that he had after this all happened.
Steve Chambers, though, he had kids.
Steve Chambers basically became a father figure to Michelle Chambers' kids while this was going on. His wife's kid. Michelle had been married previously.
Okay.
And Steve was hanging around, and obviously he became a father figure to them.
And Kelly Campbell, she was single, no kids.
Kelly was actually married herself,
right,
and she did have a couple of kids.
Right.
As far as I know, they're still married, but I'm not really sure of that.
Amazing. Jeff Diamant,
yes.
Diamant, thank you so. I got your name wrong. Diamant, thank you so much, my friend. This is great information. I really love it. Heist, the oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. If anything new comes up in this story, give me a call. We'll put you right back on the air, because I love this stuff.
My pleasure. It's been a real pleasure being on your show.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's Staten Island. It's a small world. You know what I mean? We got to stick together. Okay, my friend. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Ed.
Okay, they had Jeff Diamant. It's funny too, because I thought his name was pronounced Diamant. Like a little e at the end. It's Dimant, and the name of the book is Heist, the oddball crew behind the $17 million Loomis Fargo theft. Really weird too. I was just thinking as I was talking to Jeff that last night I was watching a couple of movies on Putlocker. And both of the movies, by total coincidence, took place in Staten Island. I mentioned Wolf's Pond Park and the mall and stuff. It was really, really strange. One is called Staten Island Summer. And the other one was something like Three Kings or something like that, about these boys who go into Wolf's Pond Park and build a house where they run away from home and they live in his house. And both of them took place in Staten Island. I was looking for different movies on Staten Island. And here's this guy from Staten Island. Very, very strange. Jeff Diamant. I was telling a story about that robbery, the bank robbery at the Staten Island Mall, from the guy who later on he took that money and then they robbed a jeweler too. They went to this jeweler's house and they robbed him, his safe, and I think they killed him and his wife or something like that. And then they went down to Florida. He was like local Staten Island gangsters, and then they went down to Florida, Miami, and he bought a nightclub and he was hobnobbing with all the. And he's recently, I think they caught him and they charged him with that murder in Staten Island. But that day, when he robbed the bank in the Staten Island Mall, I just happened to be walking into the mall that day, and I ran into one of the security guards. I wasn't working in the mall yet. This is before I had my business in the mall. And one of the security guards is a friend of mine at the mall. And when he saw me coming in, he was coming out waiting for the cops. And he goes, Eddie, get out of here, get out of here. The cops are coming. I was like, get out of here, Ed, get out of here. Some guy just robbed the bank with a shotgun. He says, don't hang around here. So I took off. But that's kind of interesting, that story. I want to do a show about that one day, about that bank robbery at the Staten Island Mall, where the guy later on, I've looked it up, the story, trying to find a guest to discuss that topic. Never quite found anything. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about this before we get going. The movie's called Masterminds with Zach Galifianakis, and it's really good. Check that out. And you can find it on Putlocker and all those, online. What do they call those things? I forget. Okay, if you like tonight's show, don't forget the member section. OppermanReport@gmail.com if you want to send a donation. OppermanReport.com to join the member section. And we have 2 new shows going up in there. One is with Chris Milligan. Another one is with, that I just taped today, is with, what's her name? Lillian Glass, Dr. Lillian Glass. And we discuss a little bit about Trump. We discuss about, she's a body language expert. We discuss a little bit about Bill Cosby faking his blindness, because she was in the National Enquirer today about that. And then we discussed, too, about, what's his name, Kanye West, and his body language when he did that photo opportunity with Trump at Trump Tower. And I believe that's connected to Pizzagate. But Miss Glass, Dr. Glass, did not quite agree with me. So that's in the members section. You can check that out. And that's what keeps us going. You support the members section and keeps us going. And don't forget my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can find that at Amazon.com or at my website, emailrevealer.com. Big opportunity right now. We are 99% sure I'm going to be going on a big station, AM/FM station in California. This is your time, guys. I'm going to give you a great deal to advertise. And if you advertise now and you buy this package, I got a package. It comes out to $7 per station that I'm on now, per week. $7 per week per station. And you got to pay in a big bulk going out. But that's what it averages out to. And I got to tell you, you'll definitely, whatever your product is, you're going to make $7 per station. That's easy. But also, too, we'll get you on that station in California. So get a hold of me for those ad rates at oppermanreport@gmail.com. Thank you so much. The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company located in India. So you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service to boot. They offer all kinds of services, business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshore research networking, customer care, press release content writing and distribution, and much, much more. They offer website development, e-commerce solutions, mobile responsive designs. Now, I've personally worked with Subhash for over 10 years. This is the man that puts out my press releases. They've done work on my websites, so I can personally recommend SubhashTechnosis.com. You can find a link to Subash Technosis at OppermanReport.com and also AwakeRadio.us. Welcome to our new sponsor.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And this portion of the show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. Go to emailrevealer.com, got a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But also, too, you can catch your spouse cheating online. You send us their email address, and we'll take that email address, we'll chase it back to online dating websites and catch them cheating online. And also, too, while you got the holiday season here, I know everybody likes to locate long-lost relatives and old friends and loved ones and stuff like that. We can do that for you at emailrevealer.com, our people search. But give us some time, because you don't want to hit us up on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve and expect the results by the morning. We got with us back here a returning guest, Ted Rubenstein, legend, the great Ted Rubenstein, legendary, one of our greatest living researchers right now. Ted's a great guy. He contacts me all the time on Facebook. A little more than I want him to. No, I just kidding. He contacts me all the time on Facebook, and we get into these great discussions, all different topics. He's always working on something great, cutting-edge stuff. He put us in touch with this guy, Michael Best from Glomar Disclosure, who's going to be doing a show on Awake Radio and all the other stations.
Disclosure.
Yeah, Glomar Disclosure, yeah. So Ted Rubenstein, if you don't know who he is, he's got a great long history, pedigree with the Mae Brussels and the Valerie Flint and Dave Emery. And now we have him here today, Ted Rubenstein. Hey, Ted, let me ask you a question real quick. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and send you a tip, how can they email you?
Ted at Albany Consort, it's all one word, Albany like the city, and Consort is spelled CONSORT.com.
Ted at albanyconsort.com. Now, I got to confess, Ted, that was a trick, okay? I want everybody to email Ted Rubenstein and nag him about doing a show, okay, on Awake Radio. He promised me he's going to do a show, okay? And we got to get this guy hosting his own show and bringing us his research every week. So send him an email at ted@albanyconsort.com, okay? And nag him until we get this guy to do it. Okay? I hate to do it, Ted. But I had to. All right, brother. What do you got going on? We want to talk about two things, okay, that are on your mind. One is the helicopter pilot, Wicklesbaum. And then the other one...
Joseph Wicklesbaum.
Wicklesbaum.
Is the guy's name. And he owned a helicopter company which ferried high rollers to Trump casinos. And... he's a convicted cocaine dealer.
Right.
And he got a reference from Trump in 1980, or else he was questioned about it in 1980. Anyway, this was right around the time that Wicklesbaum was getting out of jail. And Wicklesbaum has been denied a casino license.
No, I mean, Trump was.
Yeah, and I think you're the one who told me about his case being shopped to Trump's sister?
Yes, here's what happened, okay? Wicklesbaum gets busted on his case. His case, for some reason, even though it was Florida and New Jersey, it was two different states. Somehow it wound up in New York in front of Donald Trump's sister. And she put out a notice saying, oh, my goodness, I cannot preside over this case because I fly in his helicopter every week and my kids fly in his helicopter and we know his family and we see him every weekend. There's no way I could judge this case impartially. So she put out a recommendation in her ruling that she, when she withdrew from the case, she puts out a glowing recommendation of the guy. And I got that from David K. Johnson. He's repeated that story many times. So that's what happened
and
with that.
And then he got a light sentence from another judge.
Oh, he had a life sentence?
That the case then got sent to. But I don't know, because he's apparently been convicted in several different cases.
Right.
I'm going to refer now to the Smoking Gun article from March 1st of 16 that's entitled, Trump, Cocaine Dealer? What cocaine dealer? And it says in there that Wicklesbaum been barred from casinos due to narcotic and tax convictions. In 1980, Trump was questioned concerning his relationship with Wicklesbaum, who completed his sentence that year. He managed a helicopter company that carried high rollers to the Trump casinos. Trump authored a pre-sentencing letter praising the drug dealer. And before being convicted on cocaine trafficking, he had separate convictions for grand theft auto and embezzlement. He is now 74, living in Los Angeles. His main conviction was for distributing kilos of cocaine smuggled into Florida by two Colombian brothers. He could have gotten 18 years, but received only 3 due to cooperating with the DEA. Now, I don't think that case had anything. Obviously, didn't have anything to do with the one that later involved Trump's sister. And it says another mafia associate was his enforcer. Trump claims that he has had almost no dealings with the guy recently, but acknowledged seeing Wicklesbaum walking through Trump Tower recently. Now, this I think you've also mentioned to me. At one point, Trump considered stashing Marlon Maples in Wicklesbaum's apartment, which was in Trump Towers, after Wicklesbaum reported to prison. This is according to Wayne Barrett's book. And both Wicklesbaum and his girlfriend bought condos or something in Trump Tower.
Yeah, and David K. Johnson says that they got some kind of sweetheart mortgage deal there that didn't have to get approved for their loan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because now we're going to go into the background of these guys, Wicklesbaum and his pals.
Well, let me interrupt you for 1 second.
I know you know...
Wait, you know there's a connection to OJ and all this, right?
That's where we're getting to.
Go ahead, my friend.
That's Joey Ippolito.
Right, go.
Joey Ippolito. Okay. Joey Weichelsbaum was an old friend of Donald Aronow. Donald Aronow built cigarette boats down in North Miami. And he was murdered in 1987. And Joey Weichelsbaum was questioned in connection with his murder, but was not deemed a suspect.
Really?
Aronow not only sold these cigarette speedboats to the drug smugglers, but he also sold them to the DEA to catch the drug smugglers. And he had a multi-million-dollar contract with the government. And he was a very, very good friend of George Herbert Walker Bush, who I believe bought a cigarette boat from Aronow.
I wonder if he bought one of the DEA type or the smuggler type. You know? I wonder.
What's the difference?
I don't know.
And another person who bought a boat from Aronow and who may have been involved in financing Aronow's company was none other than Robert Vesco.
Wow.
So anyway, Aronow was murdered gangland style in Miami in 1987. There's 2 books on it. One of them is called Speed Kills. That's the later book. The one that was published, and it's the more controversial book that I'm going to be reading from, it's called Blue Thunder, How the Mafia Owned and Finally Murdered Cigarette Boat King Donald Aronow. Thomas Burdick and Charlene Mitchell. I'll just say that the main suspects in the murder are some drug smugglers linked to the Lansky crowd. The main guy was Ben Kramer, and he's believed to have contracted a guy named Don Young. Ben Kramer is related to Lansky. The name Lansky just crops up throughout with all these people, because Lansky was, I think we might have mentioned before, he and his pals like James Caan and Alvin Malnick and all these people, they would hang out at Don Soffer's Turnberry Isle. That's where Donna Rice entrapped Gary Hart.
Wow.
That was on Don Soffer's boat. And also the cricket club was owned by Malnick. But Don Soffer was a friend of Aronow's. And as I say, a lot of these drug smugglers are tied to Lansky. And it's the viewpoint of law enforcement officials that Lansky wasn't himself involved in drug smuggling, but he would finance drug deals or pay for the equipment that was used in drug deals. And both Vesco's name also would come up in that context. So it makes sense that Lansky would be, even though he was dead, and I don't know, he died about 93. But a lot of these drug traffickers are linked to the Lansky crowd, and also to the Genovese crime family, which we'll get to in a minute. So anyway, let me read a page out of Blue Thunder that will say how Joey Weichelsbaum ties into these other people. Okay. The authors are asking about people tied to this one organized crime figure named Frankie Vicerto, who a lot of these people, I guess I didn't mention, a lot of these people are involved in racing boats besides just, Aronow didn't just build boats, he raced boats. He was a very competitive guy, and a lot of these other people, including the drug smugglers, are involved in racing boats. Racing cars too, but that's another story.
Right.
Anyway, in this, the authors are asking questions about Joey Weichelsbaum's background. They're questioning a guy from the Broward Organized Crime Department. Let's see. Joey Weichelsbaum, says John Sampson from Broward Organized Crime Division, who seems to know everyone with any connection to organized crime in the Miami area. He pauses. He likes to make me work for the information. I don't know. I think I've been getting a touch of Alzheimer's lately. Another pause. The last I heard of Joey Weichelsbaum, he was trying to take over ownership of the Jockey Club. Sampson says that one time a federal organized crime strike force was looking into him, but he didn't know what happened. He does recall one incident involving Joey's brother, Frank. The man was unloading a cargo container from Eastern Airlines in New Jersey. He had a heart attack. When the police went through his pockets, Frank Wickelsbaum name was there, and 200 pounds of marijuana in the cargo crate. How about Frankie Vicerto? Ever hear of him? I remember the name, Sampson says. He's a member of La Cosa Nostra, but I can't recall in what connection. Quote, Wickelsbaum seems to know Vicerto's business. Joey's no slouch then. No, Sampson says, I was convinced Joey was pretty big. Sampson tells me that Wickelsbaum was also friendly with another friend of Aronow's. Quote, he was real tight with Joey Ippolito.
Wow.
He explains. When they were racing off New Orleans and one of the crew got killed in a boat crash, Joey Wickelsbaum sent a plane to pick up Joey Ip and the rest of the crew. That's how tight they were. Joey Ip is second-generation La Cosa Nostra, one of 9 children. His father was an associate of mob chieftain Simone Sam the Plumber di Cavalcanti. That's who the Sopranos were modeled after, by the way, the di Cavalcanti crime family of Jersey. The man who won the bitter mafia struggle for control of the northern New Jersey construction industry back in the 50s. Now the plumber, who hates his nickname, is retired, and like many other old mafiosi, lives in Miami Beach. Joey Ippolito's older brother, Louis, is also mob. John Sampson investigated him at one time. We did a wiretap on Louis when I was at Dade working with Hollywood. Louis was in a scheme out of JFK where they were bringing in some shit, marijuana and hash. I asked if Joey had any other connections. I asked if Joey Ip had other connections. Quote, I was talking to a source one time that had information on a steel-hulled, empty 85-foot shrimper that they picked up with a load of dope on it, a load of grass. Now, the guy, the source, had done some good things for the feds, and he was saying that the boat was Meyer Lansky's because the people there were talking about it. And the people who were talking about the boat being Lansky's were guys that I know to be very Italian and very much involved with some offshore powerboat racers. One Joey Ippolito Jr. Okay, one last paragraph here. Sampson comments that he's always suspected the mafia was involved in Florida's drug business, but that he couldn't get anyone to listen. He was also convinced that there was a connection between the drug activities of Florida organized crime and the New York families. Okay. So now Joey Ippolito, as you know, comes up in the O.J. Simpson case, possibly as a source for cocaine, but definitely because he hired A.C. Cowlings as his driver. Your turn.
Wait, is it my turn?
Yes.
Well, I don't know what to say. You know, one thing, did you come across Michael Jackson's name in all this? Because I know he took out, he had gotten a loan from the Lansky family's payday loan businesses down there in Florida.
Well, that's where that's Malnick. That's where Malnick was involved with Jackson. And Malnick is the so-called heir to Meyer Lansky, although that's debatable. And, of course, hotly disputed by Malnick. Malnick did have his car blown up one day, so it pretty much indicated he was involved with gangland elements. But, yeah, the Michael Jackson connection to this comes through Alvin Malnick.
And what about when Debbie Wasserman Schultz just did this great deal for the payday loan industry down there? Do we know of any kind of connections or getting any money from these Malnick guy or any of these folks?
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying it didn't. I've never heard that.
Okay, well, yeah, I haven't heard it either, but I wonder if I stumbled on something.
Well, they're both Jewish, but no. Oh, okay.
Okay. I go, I know, you know, it's an international conspiracy, right? You know that. That goes all the way back. Oh my God. I'm joking, people. Don't come after me. I need a break. Well, what about?
Okay, so I don't know. So Ippolito. There's just a lot of strange circumstances, but it seemed that they let him out of jail, and then he hooked up with. He had a meeting with O.J., and then he got caught quote unquote, but it was all seemed staged. I don't know. And then he got a pretty light sentence, and then he disappeared. And I think his family members are still popping up in drug busts here and there, but I'm not that up on what Ippolito's been up to in recent years.
Now, what about
He seems to have dropped off the radar. He's probably cooperated with the feds. That's what it looks like.
Right. Now, probably been trying to get OJ to confess. Now, what about there was a thing about when OJ and Al Cowlings were doing the slow-speed chase, that there's a theory that they were going to go down to Mexico and then they were going to be flying down to Florida, and that people down on those boats down there said, yeah, OJ's coming to dinner tonight, and they had it all prepared for him. Have you heard that story?
No. Oh, I may have heard something like that. Now, there's a new Facebook group called OJ is Innocent, and I tried to get them to discuss the organized crime connection without me having to prompt them all, but it didn't seem to go anywhere. But let me give you the name of this article that you're familiar with, that the main article that links Joey Ippolito to the O.J. Simpson case. And that was by Alex Constantine.
Right.
And you can find it on his website. And you can find it as a standalone booklet, I think, or online too. And it's also in a book I have in front of me, his first book called Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America. And the article is entitled The Hollywood, Florida Mob Connection, the CIA, and O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with all of that Alex Constantine work. As a matter of fact, I remember when he was typing it out live in the Usenet groups, when he was developing all the day by day, and he was doing all this. And then later on, went into the book and the website and all that kind of stuff. Now, but the thing is, as the years have gone by, how much of that stuff has been confirmed besides Constantine? Do we know?
What stuff?
All this stuff about O.J. and Ippolito and stuff like that, how much of it has been corroborated by third parties?
I would say very little.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but what I mean, remember that guy who was supposed to be stalking Pauline Barbieri?
Yes, Waz. His name was Waz. Yeah.
I don't think any of that stuff was really corroborated.
No, that
and whether these other murders at the Met Saloon were connected or not.
Well, I can tell you this: the Waz story was corroborated because the cops had his diary and stuff like that. That's corroborated. Another thing that always popped out. I mean, you never hear about it.
Didn't that story implicate Kardashian?
Kardashian, yeah, the Kardashian was involved in a gambling operation. And I'll tell you something else, too. There was a guy, I remember there was a guy who was just, you could see, they had a little clip of him on the news. He was scared to death, and he was asking for immunity. And he said, this is about illegal gambling, this whole thing. And he was asking for immunity. He had his lawyers with him. Never heard anything about him since. I don't know what happened to that guy. And that was live during the trial. There was all going on. A lot of stuff went on in that trial that kind of just vanished away in a haze of confusion.
Okay. Now, let me read a page out of this article of Constantine's.
Okay.
The Ippolito Circle is chock-a-block with enforcers capable with an assist from infiltrators in the LAPD of framing Simpson. Okay, but we're not going to get into all that. But anyway, Frankie Vicerdo. Now, remember, Frankie Vicerdo was a pal of both Aronow, the murdered Aronow, and of Joey Weichelsbaum. And he's also tied to Joey Ippolito. Frankie Vicerdo, for example. Vicerdo, Joey's lead hitman, was an original member of New York's Purple Gang, an offshoot of the Genovese family. The Purple Gang formed in the 70s, named after the bootleggers of Prohibition-era Detroit. A 1970 file on the gang, prepared by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, notes that they operated in Florida and may be using this state as a base of operations and were committing gangland murders in Florida. At the time, they ran the largest heroin smuggling operation in the country. Vicerdo, a suspect in the killing of Donald Aronow, is the leader of the Purple Gang. He is a terrorist and gun runner, In the past, he has worked with death squads in Guatemala, traditionally a bailiwick of the CIA. Okay, now,
hey,
yeah.
Let me give you a little anecdotal story that I got here. There was a story that Armand Della Croce was Ianello Della Croce's son. A lot of people said at the time, people suspected he was one of the shooters in the Castellano murder. Okay, but
was his first name Armand?
Yeah, Armand. Yeah. Now he lived on Staten Island, and there was an incident because he had a federal firearms dealer's license. Okay, and there was an incident that made the papers that he was on a Trump helicopter going back and forth from Atlantic City, and he was waving around a MAC-10 machine gun on the helicopter. So one of the other helicopter patrons there, flipped out, and they called the cops, and the cops stopped him, and they never made an arrest because he had a federal firearms license to be in possession of a MAC-11 automatic machine gun. And I wonder if that was one of Wickelbaum's helicopters, because it all seems to fit.
So he had a federal license to have an automatic gun.
Yeah.
And he's tied to organized crime.
Yeah, his father.
And he gets a pass?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I got to tell you something. The office I worked out of in Brooklyn there, that was an organized crime, all the cases were organized crime defense. And that guy had an FFL license, and he was a gunsmith, and he did ballistics reports for court and stuff like that. It was guns all over the place.
And where was this?
In Brooklyn. Bay Ridge.
Oh. Have you heard that the Brooklyn coroner was controlled by organized crime, and that's why they wanted Dorothy Kilgallen to have the autopsy out of Manhattan and done in Brooklyn, where the mob controlled the coroner?
I never heard that. But weren't you the one that was telling me about who was that guy? Salvatore Reale.
Yes, Salvatore Reale supposedly being spotted at Mina Airport.
Oh, get the hell out of here! Wow. Okay, because he was
Brennikeep, and I don't know whether it's true or not.
Yeah, he was a notoriously famous private investigator coming out of Brooklyn, who was a big shot, swaggering kind of guy, and got caught up in being a bag man doing bribes in New York City back in the early '80s. Very interesting that he would.
And wasn't he involved with at JFK Airport?
I couldn't tell you exactly. I have never done any research or read about him. Only what I know about him is from experience, just hanging around these guys. And suddenly one day his name blasting all over a newspaper and giving everybody a bad reputation. Because we were such straight guys, man. We tried so hard to do the right thing all the time. And here's this guy gave us a bad name. It was really, really distressing. But anyway.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to Frankie Vicerdo.
Right.
Frankie, besides heading the Purple Gang, a group so vicious that it even intimidated mainstream mafia families, Vicerdo is suspected of being a terrorist and a large-scale gun runner. He is close friends with Jorge Antonio Zemeri Safi, an international terrorist and professional assassin. In 1975, Zemeri Safi and Vicerdo were observed at the Revere Indoor Gunnery Range in Pompano Beach, where they were firing a variety of high-powered weapons. The operator of the range overheard them discussing their joint travels to Guatemala around the time that a Guatemalan official was murdered. A weapon found at the site of the assassination was traced to Vicerdo.
Wow.
In 1979, U.S. Justice Organized Crime Strike Force intelligence brief notes that Zemeri Safi heads a paramilitary group in Guatemala which seeks to overthrow the present regime. He's currently being sought by Guatemalan authorities for murder and weapons offenses as a result of a 1975 shootout in which a Guatemalan G2 officer was killed. The prosecution of Zemeri Safi on U.S. gun charges was the first part of a multifaceted prosecutive effort by federal organized crime strike force members directed at hired killers utilized by La Cosa Nostra throughout the United States. Now, in the 70s, there was a whole series of gangland killings that involved .22 caliber weapons fired up close. A lot of informants were killed that way. And then a lot of just house cleaning. But anyway, a lot of these killings were believed to be carried out by the Purple Gang.
Very interesting.
Okay.
Let me give you everybody a little update, because next week we have Doug Valentine coming back You might recall he wrote the book about the Phoenix program. But Doug Valentine's coming back. I mean, one of his first interviews about his new book, might be the first. And the new book is called The CIA as Organized Crime. So that kind of fits into all this, to like what we're talking about tonight. Very interesting stuff.
By the way, let me just mention Alex Constantine's new book, because I just came across it accidentally, and I didn't see any publicity about it. It's called Jackals, The Stench of American Fascism. And it's like this other book. It's a whole collection of essays, not necessarily connected to each other, but it all involves parapolitics and, there's the secret government and all that.
Yeah, the book
mind
is
mind control. He's really big on mind control.
Yeah, and he's convinced me about mind control. But the thing is about that book's about Trine Day, and I tried to get him on the show. I begged him to come on the show. He says that we had him booked to come on the show and that we blew him off and we never. But he's wrong. We never had a firm date to come on. I've begged him to come back, and either he won't forgive me over that, or there's some other reason he won't come on the show. I don't know. But
I've heard that he just doesn't like giving interviews. Like, I haven't tried it. In fact, I should. I should just try to see how much, interviews he's got on YouTube or other platforms. Because, I've just been told he just doesn't do many interviews.
The publicist from Trine Day came to me and said, hey, do you want to interview Alex Constantine? And I said, yes, I do, but we got this problem. He's mad at me, but tell him I'm sorry and ask him to beg him to forgive me because I'm a huge fan. And they came back, no, he won't do it. So he has a personal hatred of me.
Oh, ridiculous.
I know.
By the way,
man.
his first book came out on Feral House, not Trine Day. Anyway.
I know. Which again, to me, kind of raises a flag, because the stuff they're up to it. Process Publishing is Feral House.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Take a look into that. We got about a half hour.
I was reading something.
We got about
how long do we have?
A half hour, 25 minutes to a half hour left. So you want to move over to Zapruder? Because then we can get some of that Pizzagate stuff.
Yeah, let's do that now. Oh, wait, I do have it in front of me if I need to refer to it. Yeah. We're going to talk about certain aspects of so-called Pizzagate. Specifically, I want to refer to some of the New York coverage of it.
Before we get to that, now
the New York Times coverage. Go ahead.
Ted Rubenstein is a legend. Okay, a legendary, respected, old timer, elder statesman. Okay, in this field. What is your impression about Pizzagate? Do you have any kind of doubt at all?
I have doubts about what it reveals. But I don't have any doubts that these people are perverse, let's say, in some way.
Okay.
I think in some ways I agree with the idea that they're just trying to rub it in our face about how edgy they are, and I was reading one yesterday about how this is all about the liberals' idea that children should be exposed to sexuality. And this guy even was blaming it on George Carlin. And that part really bugged me. I've never heard George Carlin suggested that, you should expose children to all this, sexual content or sexual, bawdiness or dirty jokes or whatever, the dirty words. I mean, George Carlin certainly wasn't talking about children, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm going to
talk about them rubbing it in our face. About them rubbing it into our face, there is an element to that black magic, which I kind of think that what a level of going on here is that they want to rub it in your face. That's part of it. That it has to be known what they're doing in order for them to get the kind of power that they need from it.
Well, I've heard that. See, I don't know about that. That's kind of a little far out there for me.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know whether how many or if any of these people are involved in any child sex trafficking rings. And I think, these Pizzagate investigators get in trouble when they make that assumption based on what we have in front of them. That's why I kind of like this article that I saw in the New York Times, because I was really down on the New York Times coverage of the story. But finally, there's two developments that I want to discuss. One of which was the fact that there's an article called "There Are No Child Sex Slaves at My Local Pizza Parlor," which ran in the Sunday Review section of the New York Times on the 10th. And the author of this piece is none other than Alexandra Zapruder, daughter of Abe Zapruder, who filmed the JFK assassination on that infamous day. And the daughter, Alexandra, has come out with a book just recently about being the daughter of the maker of the most famous piece of film in the world, amateur film in the world, or news film in the world. And so anyway, this article is basically poo-pooing the Pizzagate allegations and talking about her own experience with conspiracy theories that are unfounded and so-called fake news. I'll read one paragraph here. I've seen my share of conspiracy theories. Oh, it was her grandfather. Sorry to misstate that. My grandfather, who accidentally took a home movie of President John F. Kennedy's assassination, now known as the Zapruder film, was implicated in some of the most delusional stories about that event. He had colluded with the CIA to allow his film to be altered just days before the assassination. He had secret ties to Lee Harvey Oswald through a co-worker who later married Oswald's close friend. And, wait for it, he was the one who pulled the trigger through an elaborate gun-as-camera mechanism at the bidding of the Jewish mafia. I'll just read one more, two more paragraphs. The government's failure in the historian Art Simon's words to come up with a, quote, coherent and believable account of the assassination, unquote, left many gaps to be filled, while early assassination researchers performed a valuable function by making important information public. Later conspiracy theorists relied on association and innuendo and cherry-picked details to build increasingly wild narratives. If one outcome of Kennedy's assassination was a loss of trust in government and the news media, we have now entered an era in which such suspicions have mushroomed into something far more dangerous, a rupture in the very idea of shared truth. Okay. So, anyway, it's kind of interesting that through the personage of Alexander Zapruder, one can say that now the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory has been joined with Pizzagate, but only to this respect.
Now, is she a regular columnist there in that weekend magazine?
No, I think this is like a guest opinion that appeared in the Sunday Review, which publishes things from people that are not regular columnists.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And I think this has something to do with the fact that she's coming out with this book just at this time.
Right. Okay.
Which I'm sure is reviewed in the New York Times, unlike all the conspiracy books that the New York Times takes great pains to avoid ever reviewing, just like all the other mainstream papers do. But anyway, the other article, and I wish I had this in front of me. I think it was on the 8th, but anyway, it was last week in the New York Times. They had an article which actually went into some of the Pizzagate allegations, some of the pictures, some of the Instagrams, and some of the emails that were written to or from Podesta, and they had to do with handkerchiefs and pizza-related maps that, they didn't seem to fit the context of what the emails were about.
Right.
And finally, the New York Times prints that stuff. They don't rebut it. They just leave it hanging out there. But at least they've done that much.
Now, who was the author of that reporting? Do we know?
I don't have that guy's name in front of me. I do know that at this point they have several people writing about it, because if you remember, the first person they had writing about it was this woman named Cecilia Kang. She's a technology writer, and then her name actually turned up in the Podesta emails. And she wrote this really dismissive article that didn't talk about any specific facts. It was just a total attack piece with nothing to really rebut anything. And then I think she wrote a subsequent piece And then after that, they put in a couple of other people on it. Various aspects of it, because, it all fits into this general fake news narrative that's so important. And also with the Russian hacking. These things, in some ways, they're all of a piece.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question now, because you're an old guy like me, right? Now, I've never seen a post-election, a sitting president and the losing campaign try to discredit the incoming president in such a way, even bringing in the Russians. And what are you making of all this, man? What are you seeing?
Well, I think it's partly because it's Trump and because he's so beyond the pale. But I also think that the neocons and the neoliberals, the ISIS enemy wasn't enough, and so they had to bring back the Russian bear as a threat, and not only in Syria and the Ukraine, but now most intently with the cyber hacking and the claim that they affected the election through Julian Assange, because Julian Assange has such a visceral hatred for Hillary Clinton that he was willing to help the Russians put Trump in power. But there's been various articles debunking aspects of this whole narrative, and also pointing out, this was from Time magazine 20 years ago, the United States interfered or meddled in the Russian election to tilt it towards Yeltsin. So we have, again, the pot calling the kettle black, even on the face of it. So even if the allegation is true that the Russians are doing it, we've meddled in their elections. That's the point of that. But there's also indications that the breadcrumbs that lead to Russia being involved are so blatant that the Russians would have been smarter than to do this. Apparently, there's one name that's left on the electronic traces that is the name of the guy who started the KGB. Now, why would a Russian hacker use a state actor use the name of someone who's going to be traced to the Russian KGB in its early history? So that doesn't make sense. So, and it's very easy to make it look like the hacking is coming from one place, but it's really coming from another.
Well, there was an Assange interview.
Anyway, I'm not an expert in this. I don't,
right.
It's way out of my field.
No, but you're a wise guy, and the thing is a wise man. Assange just came out with an interview, I believe it was just yesterday, in the last 48 hours, saying, no, this didn't even come from a hack. And the questioner was saying, didn't this come, because there's an article that came out. A guy that used to work for WikiLeaks just came out with an interview saying that, no, this was hand-delivered in the woods in D.C., that this didn't come from a Russian hack. It didn't come that way. It came from someone who worked within the DNC, which was what I think. I think it's
remember the guy who was murdered?
Right.
The guy who was murdered, and they kept asking Assange, why would you be putting up a reward for this guy if he wasn't one of your sources? And then I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah, right. Seth. So, his name was Seth something.
There is the question. There is the question of Assange's credibility.
Yeah.
But and I see him as a guy with agenda, but I don't see him as a liar. But a lot of people seem to. A lot of people won't take his word on anything.
Now, okay, just another quick question for you. These establishment, Clintons and Obama, these establishment types, and the neocons and the neoliberals, what would they have a complaint if Trump is turning the foreign policy over to Exxon and Mobil, and he's turning over domestic policy to Goldman Sachs and a bunch of generals? What would their objection to that be? It's not like he's really an outsider who's trying to do anything, except to hijack money for himself.
You've just raised such a good question that I can't answer it. I think it's just his perceived uncontrollability and independence. And so they're thinking, well, even though some of these appointments might be to their liking, they're still, wary of him, and they're still wondering what he might do once he gets in there. And I think they're especially worried about this Russian situation. And
Maybe
I just don't think we need to be making. I don't think we should be coddling a guy like Putin, but I certainly don't think we should be poking the Russian bear all over again.
Maybe because they see that Trump has no problem stealing everything that's not nailed down, and he's going to steal more than they think he deserves. Especially if he has a personal connection, he makes a personal deal with Russia and Putin to open up all that oil, and get cut out all that stuff in the future. Who knows? Maybe Trump is stealing more than they want him to steal.
Well, they still have. In no way have they gotten anywhere towards resolving these colossal conflicts of interest that he has with his businesses.
And what's the
What
stop
do you do? Wait till the last minute on all this stuff?
Well, what's to motivate him to do it? All he has to do is hold up a little shiny ball, and everyone runs over there and goes, looks at that. Well, he's stealing more on the other side. They can't keep up with that guy. That guy's a master con man. They're not going to keep up with Donald Trump and his family. Those fast-talking sons, man. You ask him a question.
But if he doesn't do something and he's making money while he's hand over fist while he's president, won't that arguably be grounds for impeachment? I don't know. This is all uncharted territory.
I know, man. What are we going to do? Got to get out of here. It's time to go. Got to get out of here, man. There
was one artist that actually left the country because Trump got in. I forget which guy it was. I forget. Comedian, maybe. He's a comedian.
Well, look at this guy, Richard Haskell,
anyway.
man. I just had him on the show. He left the country. He's down in Venezuela or something like that, or Costa Rica. Hey, what do you make of this? Richard Haskell, the guy who was on the plane with the underwear bomber or the shoe bomber or something like that, and he ratted him out.
What about him? I know that, what's her name? Rebecca Roth doesn't like him.
Yeah, Rebecca Roth. What do you make of her? Because I was just offered an interview with her, and then I find out that now she's accusing my producer of being a spy or something. What do you make of Rebecca Roth?
I'm confused about her. Okay. I don't trust all her information. And then this is, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I read somewhere that she says she's 65, and yet you look at her on YouTube, she looks half that age.
Well, all the stuff that's not her real name.
Why would you say you were older than you are?
Well, that's not her real name, right?
I know that's not her real name. Yeah. Right, I understand that. But they show the person that she is, and she sure doesn't look 65 to me.
Well, the other issue, too, is her fans are like they're fanatics, and so I got enough people stalking me. Now, what about the great Sheriff Joe Arpaio? Here's a man, a Nazi for your own heart, right? I mean, what more of a fascist could we have than Sheriff Joe Arpaio? Now, but yesterday, did you catch that news conference yesterday? No, I didn't hear it. Yeah, check it out, man.
I know something about birther. He's reviving the birther thing.
He's not giving up, man. The birth certificate. They had two forensic documents examiners do a press conference yesterday, and I only caught the second half of it. And I got to tell you, their work is very impressive. There is something with that document. The one that the PDF that the that the Obama put out.
But it's a psyop because I've heard that too, that if you look at the long form document that they handed out a couple of years ago, that there was transparent anomalies in it. But nevertheless, if anyone does what Joe Arpaio did yesterday, they're definitely being dismissed as kooks because even Trump himself he's given that up, right? So. So I don't care what their evidence is. I mean, they're really going to have a tough time trying to sell it.
I got a theory about that. Trump, if you notice, he came out and said, I believe he didn't say anything about the birth certificate being a forgery. What he came out and said is, I believe that he's an American. And he did that right after his very first intelligence briefing. And if I know Trump, I think the first question he went in there and said, okay, guys, how did this Muslim Nigerian sneak in here past you guys? And they told him, he's a CIA creation. He's one of us, is what I think. And that's why Trump doesn't believe anything coming out of the CIA right now. He says, the Obama CIA? I don't believe any of those guys.
Do you think Trump knows about the Obama connection to Business International?
I don't know. What is the Obama connection to Business International? I do not know.
Well, they're the first company that hired Obama when he got out of law school.
And you can't find that anywhere, yeah.
They're featured prominently in Carl Oglesby's book, Ravens in the Wind, as an outfit that tried to co-opt SDS back in the early 60s.
Wow.
And that they all assumed that this was coming from this company must have been doing this. They were doing this on behalf of the CIA. And then this company surfaces later with the relation to Obama. And I don't know how much Wayne Madsen, I presume Wayne Madsen, that's part of Wayne Madsen's scenario, but I haven't looked at it closely.
And then how do you land? You think that Obama's CIA?
I lean in that direction, yeah.
It would explain the shoddy paperwork.
It would explain to me why, for example, this would probably mean he would cozy with the FBI. He's not going to pardon Leonard Peltier. That has nothing to do with the CIA, but it just shows that he really, when it comes to the important stuff that the left would want to see him do, or when it comes to a real blow for social justice would be freeing Leonard Peltier, but he won't do it.
Yeah, I had his son on. I had his son on the show.
His aversion to transparency, it reflects his coziness with the national security state to some extent, or having made a deal.
Yeah, I had Leonard Peltier.
Go along. Yeah,
I had Peltier's son on the show, and you're right. This is the last hope. This is the last hope we could ever get Peltier out of prison. He's like almost 80 years old, and he took a beating in there just recently too. It's not a young man's game. Bad health, diabetes, all kinds of stuff, and you're right, man. It's a sin. And you heard the story about how the Clintons were gonna pardon him, and the FBI held a protest out in front of the White House where 200 FBI agents showed up to protest, and supposedly, they said we'll rat you out with everything we know if you give up if you let Peltier go.
Okay, now I have pulled up, I'm not going to read this, but I have pulled up this New York Times story that I was referencing from December 10th. They actually have 3 writers on it, including that one I mentioned, Cecilia Kang. So this article is called Dissecting the Pizzagate Conspiracy Theories by Gregory Aish, John Huang, and Cecilia Kang. And, as I say, I recommend it because it finally does give you details that most of the mainstream media avoided giving you because they just wanted to dismiss it all as fake news with nothing to it. And yet, if you read this article, you'll see that, some of the stuff is puzzling to say the least.
Now, is there anything they're leaving out that you've seen from Reddit and 4chan and stuff?
Well, they go into this thing about the Madeleine McCann kidnapping.
Oh, really?
From Portugal?
Yeah, because, that case has been reopened. Scotland Yard really has reopened that case. They announced it, for real. Based on new information.
In the wake of these allegations?
There was no publication that I've read makes the direct connection, but it says that they reopened it due to new information.
There may be stuff here that's popped up that they've leaved out here. It wouldn't surprise me. And in fact, there's sort of in the back of my mind there was something I wanted to. Maybe it just was the Alexander's report. Maybe that was it. But there wasn't one other thing. But that's not going to come to me. But anyway, it's good to see that at least some of the information is coming out in the newspaper of record.
Yeah, get it on record.
The symbols. I don't know what to make of the symbols. I tend to avoid them because some of them are so sort of generic looking. Like, okay, you take a paper, you unfurl a paper clip, and then you fold it another way so that it makes little inverted triangles, and then that becomes the symbol for boy lover. Well, I just can't go along with that.
Yeah, I know. And I saw some guy did this work on all the posters, because they're all done by the same artist. The posters promoting the musicians that appear there, and there is a theme.
Some of that is sick. Like, what about the one that says sex stains? Is that for children too?
Well, there's a whole theme in these things. Of tunnels is one, and another one of dead babies. You can see the outlines of and it's in every picture of dead infants and of tunnels and things going into tunnels. So there is a pattern with this artist who has a fascination of embedding dead babies and tunnels in his posters for these artists. And there's that recording too where they had one of these performance artists where she's saying that sex with little boys is a preference. Someone in the audience is joking out that he likes sex with little boys, and then the performance artist goes on to say, "Yeah, well, it's a preference." So it's not like this is a family-friendly place like they're trying to portray. Even if you give them every benefit of the doubt,
right?
I'm not bringing my kid to that place.
And yet, we're supposed to be, I don't know, tolerant, but we're supposed to see that this is just art. Yeah. This is nothing really that controversial. I don't know what we're supposed to think, but I can't go along with the moral narrative here, and the idea that these people are so put upon and terrorized. Oh, and I heard. Did you hear the interview with David Brock where he breaks down crying?
No, I did not see that. No,
and that's another thing. The guy who was interviewing him is this guy who admitted in some of his own emails that he's a self-described hack who'll do anything that people tell him to.
Right, I saw that, yeah.
And then he got hired by the New York Times, and he's doing this interview with Brock where Brock breaks down and cries about his pal, Elefantis. And you, just listening to where he cried and recovered right away, it just sounded so phony.
Yeah, Elefantis can't put on a good face either, man. There's an impromptu press conference the night of the shooting, and he just can't pull it off. But if you notice, though, they're talking about this one gunshot, a discharge of a firearm, a public discharge of a firearm, which is what the crime is. I don't know what he's being charged with. But that kind of stuff happens all the time, and every day. But they're reporting on it every single day, first thing in the morning, and several stories on different channels at night.
Well, the New York Times did an interview with him, too, in which he's talking about how he doesn't like this term fake news because it goes too far. Not everything is fake. It's like even this psycho is saying the same thing we are, but I'm not convinced. I don't know what to make of him, but I just think it was an interesting interview with him.
Ted, we're out of time. We're out of time, my friend.
All right.
You got to come back. But more importantly, we got to get you to do a show because it's important. I'm going to do a whole thing tonight later on in the after show talking about how it's really important that we have sober elder statesmen like yourself. You have a responsibility to do it. I'm calling you on it, okay? So if anybody out there wants to help produce Ted because he's nervous about tape recording and all kind of stuff, I know we have a lot of technical guys out there. Get a hold of me and let's put this together, man. We need you, okay?
All right.
Okay. Everybody,
this was fun.
Everybody email him at Ted at... Okay, I gave an email before. But Ted Rubenstein, thank you so much, my friend. Okay, God bless you.